In this video, I'm going to show you two use cases to use Reactive by using two applications. The first application we have here is a Pokemon index that lets you choose different Pokemon and display some information to a screen. And then the second application, which we're going to start with, is this tax calculator, which will accept some inputs, display some of those inputs to the screen, and then do some calculations to show some extra inputs once you submit it. And yeah, let's get started. In this example, we're going to be using a tax calculator to show you when to use Reactive when you're logically grouping information together, and as well for when you're accepting user input. So you'll see here we have some inputs and some labels, and in these inputs, we're going to use vue.model to connect these to some variables. And then we have a list right here, an unordered list with the name and address, etc. And we're going to display all the information using this list. And then finally, when we click this button, we'll have a click handler that will then connect to a function to do all of this for us. So we already have the reactive function imported from Vue. Now we need to connect all of these inputs using vue.model to accept some user input. But before we do that, we need a variable called user input. So let's say let user input equal reactive. And then reactives can only accept objects, and we're going to put some properties in here. So we have a name, an address, a total income, and employer. So those are the properties we want to accept. So we have a name, and that's going to be a string, and we're going to leave it to be empty. Address, another empty string, total income, which will be a integer, and then employer, which is an empty string. All right, now that we have our variable set, let's go ahead and start writing the directives. So vue.model, and then because we're using a reactive variable, we have the variable and the properties of it. It's basically an object, and that's how we will be interacting with this reactive variable. So we're going to say user input dot name to accept some name information. And we can go ahead and copy paste this. And then we're going to accept user input dot address. And then we'll accept user input dot total income, and then the employer. All right, so now that when we actually enter information into these inputs, we should see that it would change all the properties of this user input. And just to see that we were doing that, we're going to go ahead and connect a function and a console log that will allow us to click and see what the information is in these inputs. Show input. Go ahead and copy paste this into this function, and we're going to output user input dot name. We'll just do user input dot name, and then we'll do user input dot address. And this just makes it easier because instead of showing the whole entire object, we can just see these two string examples. Now we got to go ahead and connect this function to this button right here using a click handler. We'll do at click equals, and what's the name of our function? Show input. Show input. All right, so go back here on your browser, click it, and press Control-Shift-J to get your console. And we have this console right here. I already have some stuff inputted. What we're going to do is enter some information inside these inputs, and it should only show the name and the address because that is exactly what we're asking for when we click this button. And we'll click this, and we see that we do have the information that we put here. Let's just make it a little bit more explicit. My name, 123 BLBD for Boulevard, and then we hit submit, and that's what we see. Brian 1234 Boulevard. Now that we have the inputs, we want to take this input, and when we hit submit, we want to display that information to these list items right here. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this function, and we're going to take out this click handler function right here as well, and we're going to go ahead and create another variable, another reactive variable called let tax info equals reactive. And then we're going to have the same exact variables right here as well. And we're going to make two more. We're going to make total tax. That's going to be an integer, and tax rate. So now that we have the tax info variable created, we want to be able to get all the user input and input it into here. And then what we're going to do with this user input is do some calculations to fill the last two properties of this object. So we're going to have to create another function. We're going to call it fill data. And in here, we're going to basically say the user input dot name And that's going to be what we're going to put into the tax info is going to be put into taxinfo.name. So I did that on reverse on accident, but let's go ahead and do the other ones correctly. So taxinfo.address equals user input dot address. And then we're going to go ahead and just console log this just to see that we're doing this correctly. Taxinfo.name and then taxinfo.address. And we're going to call fill data right here in the button. And then we're going to explain why we're doing it this way after we just check that this is working correctly. So if we click it, see, we're getting nothing. But if we put some information in here, we see some output. And the reason we're doing this is because when we get the user input, if we were displaying the user input right here, it would just automatically update on its own. For example, let me show you user input.name. See, every time I change this, it automatically updates. But if I use tax info, it doesn't change until I hit submit. So this allows us to hit the submit button to submit the information, put it in here, and then display it to the screen. And that's why we have two reactive variables. One is the input, one is the output. It creates a delineation between the two so we really understand the data flow of our application. So let's go ahead and finish this function. So we got taxinfo.total income equals user input dot total income. And then we got the last one, which is the employer is equal to user input dot employer. All right, so we now have our information right here. Let's go ahead and display these fields so we can make sure everything is working correctly. We're just filling out the corresponding properties for their fields in this list right here. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. Put my name, 1234 BLVD for Boulevard, total income, super rich, 400,000. And then we'll do the employer, Netflix, right? And then let's see what happens right here. All right, it displays all our information, but we still have two more fields that we want to use to figure out what is the total tax and the tax rate. And we're going to create an if-else statement in the fill data right here. So now that we understand that these are working, these inputs are working, let's go ahead and close the console. We can get a full screen again. And let's go ahead and create the if-else function to make sure that we can then fill in the last two properties of the tax info. So what we're going to do is basically look at the user's income. So whatever the total income of the user is from the input. And we're going to say at a certain point, we want to tax them 10%. And at a certain point, we're going to tax 15%. So we're going to say if user input dot total income is greater than, let's say, 25,000, we're going to put into tax info or tax info.total tax. So this is basically saying, hey, if we have $25,000 of income, we're going to take 15% of that income and put it here. And that's going to show you how much you've been taxed for the year. So we'll go to user input.total income and we're going to times it by 0.15 for 15%. Then we'll go into tax info again and get the tax rate. And since we already know it's 15%, we're just going to input a string right here that says 15%. And then if your economic situation is different, you're not making $25,000 greater than $25,000, and go ahead and copy paste this. And then we can just change this to be 10%. So 0.10 and then 10%. All right, so now we should be able to input all this information and then get the full output. So let's go Brian, 1234 Boulevard, and total income, let's say 70,000, 2, 3, and the employer, let's say Amazon. I'm a low-paid Amazon worker, and let's say submit. And we're not getting the output that we want. So let's go ahead and figure out what's going on here that's not working. Let's scroll up. See, okay, this all looks correct. Okay, I see the problem here is that we forgot to put in the last part of our information right here. So we're not even displaying those properties. Tax info dot rate. All right, now everything should work after we input the information. So let's go ahead and re-input this information. Let's go ahead and hit submit. And we see right here my name, address, total income, Amazon. So instead of 70,000, it's actually 700,000 in here. And we see the total tax is $105,000 at a 15% tax rate. Oh, that would be really nice, wouldn't it? Now, let's go ahead and change the total income to be less than 25,000. Let's say 22,000 and see what happens. All right, the tax rate changes to 10%, and the total tax is 2,200. So we're able to change that using this if-else statement right here. And that is the application. And the reason why Reactive is so useful is because this could be 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 6. That's 10 properties that we're using. That could be 10 ref variables, and it would be a little bit difficult to see the input and then the output of our application. But because we have these two reactive variables, we can clearly see this is the user input, and then this is the output from that user input, and we can display it to the screen hitting submit. And then let's move on to the Pokemon application.